Hi everybody, it's Mrs. Ledger here, and I've just put this little video and screencast for us to try and make sure that we're as prepared as we can be for the unseen poetry part of our exam. Remember, before we actually get started, what our actual task as literature students are this year. We've got to make sure that we're unpicking literature. We're going to try our best to understand and decipher why these poems exist. Why was it that these authors chose to spend their time telling us the stories of these people and these characters? And remember in all ways that what we're going to be looking at this year through AGS Success is the idea of purposeful practice making perfect. So we're going to keep annotating and preparing as many poems as possible over these next few weeks to make sure that we are as successful as we possibly can be. Okay then, but let's get started thinking about how to actually prepare for this unseen poetry exam. The three big questions on the screen in front of you now are the three big questions you should be thinking about for every part of your literature study. We're thinking of words, imagery and structures. So thinking all the time when we read a poem or when we get to the view from a bridge section, why does the poet that we have in front of us choose to use these particular words to tell this particular story? Why do these poets choose to use these particular images presented to us through a variety of literary techniques? So when we're thinking about images and literary techniques, we're thinking of things like aural imagery, which is sibilance and alliteration. We're thinking of things such as simile, metaphor, personification, repetition, and a whole host of other things that you've all got in your notes. And then our final strand we've got to think about is why it's structured in the way that it is. Why is the story in this particular order? Why is the opening line like it is and the ending line like it is? Is it cyclical? Does it come back to a similar idea? Is there a shift somewhere in the poem? Is there a climax? Does the tone change, etc.? So again, you've got all the things you need for structure in your notes, in your book, but we'll go through some other things in this video as we go through. And here we are again, purposeful practice, making perfect. So let's make sure that we get this job done properly. All right, like everything we've done this year, we are doing this in terms of steps to success to make sure that we know the process to go through. So when we're in that exam and we are a bit struggling because we're a bit tired and we're a bit stressed out, we know the order of things. So you open your poetry exam and you first of all, step 1, read the question and highlight your focus. So on the two examples below, you have got question 1, which was a few years back, that says, Philip Larkin wrote the following poem for a memorial service after a mining disaster in 1969. Read the poem and then answer the question that follows. How does Larkin present ideas about life and death in the poem? I've highlighted in red the things I need to focus on when I'm starting to interpret the poem, which in this instance is ideas about life and death. The second example question underneath the red line, what does the narrator of the poem feel about the birth of her child, and how does the poet present these feelings? The focus for our interpretation is to do with presentation of feelings, to do with the birth of her child. I've also put in blue, however, in each of the questions, the word Larkin and the word narrator. The reason why I've done this is because an examiner will be expecting an A grade student to make sure that they know who they're talking about in the poem. So in question 1, your explanation would need to be about Larkin, so you'd be saying for things such as, within the poem, Larkin explores. Whereas in question 2, you're focusing on the narrator, so your answer would say, within the poem, the narrator explores. Step 2, we've got to then think about reading the poem, but with a question in our head. So we read the question first, step 1, and highlight our focus. We then read the poem without doing any annotations, but we've got the focus in our head as we're going through. So we know we're starting to get an idea of the sort of things we'll start to pick out. Step 3, you are then at the top of your poem going to put 2 or 3 bullet points of what the narrative of the poem is. So what the story of the poem is, what the poem is about, and that is literally just notes, 2 or 3 bullet points at the top, because you know that in your opening and introduction paragraph, you have to do what we call pinning down the story. So you've got a sentence or two about what the actual story of the poem is about. So for instance, the poem Still I Rise by Maya Angelou is about a female talking through their struggle against adversity and prejudice. That just makes sure the examiner knows you've understood the poem. So those 2 or 3 bullet points, therefore, are actually making you write your introduction. Step 4 is you are briefly going to explore the connotations of the title. It might not help anything worthwhile or have anything in it, but it might have a lot of things in it. I apologise about the typo on the screen. That should say step 4. But for instance, we need to make sure that the title might hold some important information. So again, Maya Angelou's poem Still I Rise could be annotated as you've got on the screen there. It gives us a brief and instant insight into what the feelings and the tone of this poem might be. But what also is, you've already read the poem with the question focus in mind, so by annotating the title, you've got 1 killer quotation already, and you can really start to link that into the question. Step 5. Now, it is really, really tempting to try and explore every single quotation that you can in these poems, but you can't do that. You'll run out of time. So as far as annotation is concerned, my suggestion is that you highlight and annotate 2 what I call killer quotes. Those are the quotations that link to your question this poem can't do without. The things that you can absolutely tear to pieces. Remembering this is the language section you're annotating, and it's that question at the bottom. Out of all of the words that could have been used to tell this story, why did the author choose these ones? So this is the kind of depth that we're talking about going into. So these would be 2 killer lines I've chosen from poems, and you can see on the screen the way in which we go into them. Now, because I don't want to waste any time, I've not just done language here. I've also added some imagery. So I'm being a bit cheeky by blending some of my steps together, but I just want to use it as an example of how you could do that if you wanted to. You'll also see in my notes, I doubt very well you'll be able to do it into this much detail in your annotations, but your answers should be in this much detail as I've got on this screen here. Words such as also, and it could, and perhaps are so important because it suggests a potential reading. So you've got to always be thinking about how potentially the author could mean this, however they also potentially could mean something else. Step 6, very similar to step 5, is you're looking at killer quotations, but this time poetic techniques, especially imagery. Okay, and again, you're bringing out as much information as you possibly can, trying to find through your literary techniques. Step 7, I think, is absolutely crucial because this is actually to do with structure. I'm calling it shifts because I think this is quite an easy way to think about it. You're trying to spot one place, at least one place, where something shifts, something changes, something alters within this poem. Now, verbs are a really good place to look at this. Does the poet start off talking about things walking, and then suddenly they start skipping? That shift, that emotional shift, can infer a different feeling of happiness or joy. Adverbs are also quite important. So are they slow at the beginning, slowly, or are they quickly at the end? Okay, so again, looking for that particular shift. Punctuation is also a great one to look for shifts. End stops, full stops, and caesura, dash and colons and semicolons, are there to elongate and kind of lengthen the way in which we read. The caesura is a dramatic pause. There's a reason why the authors put that pause in that particular area. But also lots of commas or lots of enjambment where lines blend into one another can really pace up the poem. So that could be quite breathy. So you're thinking about why does that part of the poem need to be quite speedy and pace-like, whereas another part of the poem might be full of caesura and therefore is quite pensive and thoughtful. And step 8, we just quickly check we have got structure covered. Step 7 might have covered it with your shifts, but just in case it hasn't, have a quick check. That's where you're starting to talk about enjambment. for instance. Don't forget, it's not good enough just to say the poet uses enjambment. You have to say how it helps tell this story. So the use of enjambment maybe creates a conversational tone. It makes the narrative feel more personal and realistic to the reader. We've spoken about caesura. The caesura creates a pensive tone and feeling of the poem, a thoughtful feeling, but then say why this poet might need this story to have that pensive, thoughtful tone about it. And just a few more things you might need to think about to do with structure. It does tend to be the area that students struggle with the most. So just learning and thinking about this list could be really helpful. But again, I can't stress hard enough, it's not good enough just to say the poet uses lots of repetition. You have to say why that repetition is so important in telling this story. What's being repeated, when is it being repeated, and why does that repetition need to happen? And those same thoughts go for everything on that list, and also language. So there you have it. Job's a good one. Couldn't be easier, really. The steps to success to make sure that the unseen poem is prepared well enough in order for you to get the highest grades possible. And then going back through the 3 big questions to make sure you are actually going to be exploring and investigating these poems properly. Remember, never ever ever just say the poet uses. You must always then go on to talk about why that thing they've used had to be used to tell this particular story. So that's us as far as preparing the poems are concerned. The next video we will look at will be actually how we write the poem, the answer, the essay itself. Thanks for listening, everybody. Happy revision and be successful with AGS Success.